and Democrat Elissa Slotkin, debating live from WXYZ Detroit as they vie for Michigan's open U.S. Senate seat.
I think this election is about the future, and I'm carrying it right now.
It is one of the most pivotal races in the entire country. On the line is control of the Senate and the issues that matter most to Michiganders.
Healthcare, affordability of housing,
the migrants, the economy,
gasoline prices, immigration, the interest rates.
Well, women's rights is probably the top thing.
Things like school districts and school safety.
Each candidate will have 90 seconds for opening statements, 1 minute to answer questions, with a 30-second rebuttal if desired, and 90 seconds for closing statements. Airing from the UP to Detroit, WXYZ's live U.S. Senate debate starts right now.
Now, live from the 7 News Detroit studios, this is Michigan's U.S. Senate debate.
Good evening and welcome to Michigan's U.S. Senate debate hosted by WXYZ. It is 1 hour dedicated to getting voters the answers they truly deserve. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm 7 News Detroit anchor Carolyn Clifford.
And I'm 7 News morning anchor Alicia Smith.
And I'm Channel 7 editorial director Chuck Stokes. Candidates, thank you for joining us here at Broadcast House. We appreciate it. A few days ago, we met with 2 of your representatives for what you would call a virtual towing cost to determine who would get the opening statement, who would get the closing statement, in what order, and who would get the very first question. Ms. Slotkin, you got the right to open up with the first question. Mr. Rogers, way down at the end of the debate, you will have the closing statement and the last word in the debate. You will also go first when it comes to time for questions. Ms. Slotkin, your opening statement, you have 90 seconds, please.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for the whole team for being here. I'm Elissa Slotkin. I'm a third-generation Michigander, and I represent Michigan's 7th district in the U.S. Congress right now. My life began in service really on 9/11. Happened to be in New York City on my second day of school. 9/11 happened. I knew my life was going to change. I got recruited by the CIA, did 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military, and then came home and worked for 2 presidents, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, proudly, because I believe service should be nonpartisan. I'm really, at the end of the day, running for Senate because I believe in my bones that we need a strong and growing middle class. That means jobs with dignity, and that means making sure we attack the costs that are eating a hole in your pocket. I'm really glad that we're having this debate. I think it's part of the democratic process to just talk about the differences between us, and we have a lot of differences. We have differences on the role of the middle class, on bringing manufacturing back from China to the United States, on protecting our rights and our democracy. But the good news is we both have records. I have been in Congress for about 5 years. Mr. Rogers was an elected politician for 20 years. So we don't have to guess about what we've done or what we will do because we've had the opportunity to be in the seat and cast important votes. I hope we can talk about those policy issues today and not throw insults at each other, because at the end of the day, it's really about trust. Who do you trust to listen to you, learn, and then go and fight on your behalf in Washington? Thanks for having me, and I look forward to the debate.
Ms. Slotkin, thank you for your opening statement. Mr. Rogers, it's now time for your opening statement. 90 seconds.
Thank you for Channel 7. Thanks for the panelists for being here. Thanks for Elissa for taking the time to be here as well. Listen, we have to answer one question. This is the most important question we will ask during this campaign. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? I've traveled the state, talked to a lot of people. The simple answer is absolutely not. Talked to a mom who was in Grand Rapids, mother of 4. She works part-time. Her husband works full-time at a small factory shop. In tears, she described how she had to go in the last 2 or 3 days of the month to a food pantry to feed her 4 children. This is not the only time we've heard that story, unfortunately, across the state. The policies coming out of Washington, D.C. have been crushing to our families. You think about the fact that I talked to a young police officer whose stepdaughter was killed by an accidental overdose of fentanyl with a cigarette that was laced with it because of a wide open border that is allowing in criminals and cartels to run the show. 10 million illegals coming to the United States. I talked to auto workers all over the state and people who are affiliated with auto workers. Their number one concern, EV mandates, are killing their future, killing their jobs. listen, if we need somebody that can go back and get busy on the very first day to bring results on grocery prices, on the border, on killing EV mandates. I look forward to having your vote. I look forward to having a discussion here this evening.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rogers and Ms. Slotkin, for your opening statements. Mr. Rogers, you do have the first question, and it is about the economy. The economy continues to be a top concern for voters, especially right here in battleground Michigan. In fact, about 8 in 10 registered voters, that is 81%, say the economy will be very important to their vote in this election. People are struggling, as you know, to pay for groceries, childcare, gas, and housing, you name it. How would your specific policies help working families here in Michigan?
Some really important things that we have to do very quickly. This is why I think you want to send someone with experience to get busy the first week. We know that the trillions and trillions of dollars of spending by the Biden-Harris administration, 100% supported by my opponent, has driven up grocery prices, gas prices, energy prices. Your housing prices have all gone up. We must get control of the outrageous and wasteful spending in Washington, D.C. We have to make ourselves energy independent. All of those votes that try to steer us away from having our own destiny decided by being energy independent is wrong. And what it's done is raised your prices at the pump, your prices at the end of the month when you're paying for energy. All of that needs to be corrected. So you have to do a few things. Energy independence. You have to undo the regulation, $1.6 trillion of new regulation in the last 4 years. And you have to make sure that we curtail spending to get our economy back on track.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rogers. Now, Ms. Slotkin, you have 60 seconds. Same question. How would your specific policies help working families here in Michigan?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. It is the number one issue I hear about is inflation, cost of living. You can't go to a grocery store, to a gas station, anywhere without someone pulling you aside and talking about how they are making choices around what they buy, what they save. For me, if there was a silver bullet that could have been fired to solve inflation, it would have been fired. So I work on 3 specific things. Number 1, we got to bring supply chains home and manufacturing back home to the United States. Back from China, good paying jobs, jobs with benefits so that we can afford more of what we want to buy. Number 2, we got to attack the costs that are just our major parts of our budget. Healthcare, prescription drugs, childcare. Think of housing, how much people pay on those things. We got to attack those costs. And then lastly, you got to save more of what you earn. That means a tax policy that actually supports the middle class, that it promotes a strong middle class. So those are the 3 specific things that I believe would help deeply with inflation.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. You have 30 seconds for rebuttal if you want it. Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, this is where my opponent and I differ, I think, most definitely. Voting for increased taxes on the middle class doesn't help the middle class. Talking about supply chain coming back but doing nothing about it doesn't help the middle class. And then lastly, when you talk about budgets in the U.S. government, voting for every big spending bill that came down the pipe in support 100% of the Biden-Harris administration has cost us all of these costs in our groceries, in our gasoline, in our housing prices.
Thank you much. Ms. Slotkin, you now have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Yeah, this is where I said it would be really important that we understand and really speak truth about our records. Mr. Rogers has voted against middle-class tax cuts over and over and over again in his record. It's constant. So the idea that somehow he cares about the middle class and middle-class tax cuts, his voting record says the opposite. I think the most important thing is to be honest about the conversation and say, we have a problem, we know we need to deal with it, attack the biggest costs in people's budgets, healthcare, prescription drugs, housing. That's what people expect of Washington.
That'll do it for the economy. Elissa, you have the next question.
All right, thank you, Carolyn. The second topic tonight, EVs and manufacturing. And I will address this question to you first, Ms. Slotkin. In our competition with China, are we investing too much in battery plants and EVs that a majority of consumers are not willing to purchase yet? You have 60 seconds, Ms. Slotkin.
Sure. Look, I don't care what kind of car you want to drive. I don't drive an EV. I live on a dirt road, on a farm. That's not likely in my future. But if the fundamental question is who do we want to make that next generation of vehicles, you better believe I want that to be Michigan and not China. Right now, everyone knows China is eating our lunch on these kind of vehicles. Just go to Europe, they have 30% market share. Go to South America, 30% market share. And America knows that we haven't always gotten it right when it comes to seeing that next generation of vehicles. In Michigan, in the 70s and 80s, we didn't think anyone would drive anything but a big vehicle. We saw these little, very fuel-efficient vehicles. We poo-pooed them. And then the Japanese came in and ate our lunch. The Koreans came in and ate our lunch. I don't want to miss that next generation. And by the way, it also means saving auto jobs. It means making sure that plants like Lansing Grand River, in the heart of my district, in Lansing, Michigan, we save the 700 jobs that are at that plant because we're upgrading it. So I don't care what you want to drive, but I want to build them.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. I'll repeat the question for you, Mr. Rogers. Are we investing too much in battery plants and EVs that a majority of consumers are not willing to purchase yet?
Yeah.
You have 60 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. And this is really important. What a candidate says and what they do when they're in office for the last 5 years, really, really important. Voted for the EV mandate at least 3 times. And as soon as about 4 weeks ago, doubled down on her position on EV mandates. I'm telling you, it is ruining our car industry. 5,000 auto dealers wrote an open letter to the Biden administration and said, you are killing the car business. Please stop with the EV mandates. And so if you think about what's happening, they mandated you have to drive that car, and my opponent signs an NDA that allows a Chinese battery company to go to outside of Goshen in order to facilitate her votes on EV mandates. Same with the $500 million rebuild at the GM factory. You're promoting Chinese technology in America. It's wrong. Let's go to hybrids. People are buying them. You don't have to mandate that they drive them.
Mr. Rogers, thank you. 30 seconds to rebuttal, Ms. Slotkin.
Again, there is no EV mandate. I don't care what you want to drive. It does not matter to me. But I don't understand the position of my opponent who says he cares about American manufacturing but doesn't want to compete against China. We all learned in COVID, for those of us who were here in Michigan during COVID, we all know that we learned our lesson that we had outsourced too far to China, our supply chains. We made a decision to bring them back. I want that manufacturing here. I don't care what you drive. I want to build them.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. 30 seconds rebuttal if you'd like it, Mr. Rogers.
Again, nothing has happened since my opponent's been in office on bringing manufacturing back to the United States. She's lost 29,000 manufacturing jobs since she's been in office, 29,000. And so the EV mandates that they talk about, 700 jobs, they're going to cost, according to Ford, a CEO, about 400,000 manufacturing jobs in the state of Michigan will go away with EV mandates. That is unacceptable, and you don't have to do it. We can build hybrid cars in America, and by the way, sell cars that people want to buy.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Chuck?
Candidates, let's now turn our attention to foreign affairs, particularly international conflicts. The U.S. has spent nearly $18 billion on military aid to Israel since the October 7th attack, and about $60 billion in military assistance to Ukraine since Russia's invasion. As a United States Senator, if elected, will you authorize more budget spending on 2 international conflicts where there is no ceasefire and no clear resolution in sight? Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, let's start with Israel. October 7th was, we just passed that anniversary of the most brutal terrorist attack maybe ever. They were stealing people, robbing people, kidnapping people out of their homes, brutally murdering them and their children in front of their families. And they took these folks and drove them into tunnels in Gaza. You cannot have a ceasefire until we get the hostages back, pure and simple. Then you can at least have a conversation of what comes next. Hamas doesn't want that. They want to continue to fight here in Israel. And we've got to pivot this to the real problem in the Middle East, which is Iran. Iran is funding Hamas. They're training them. They're giving them weapons. Same with Hezbollah in the north. They're funding them. They're giving them weapons. Same with the Houthis. They're funding them, giving them weapons and training, and even intelligence on what ships to shoot.
Time, very quickly.
Yep.
Follow up. Will you authorize more spending? Yes or no?
I would make sure that we support Israel, our great ally in the region, to be able to defend themselves. Okay. I would do a lend-lease program with Ukraine.
All right. Ms. Slotkin, same question to you.
Sure. So, look, I think it's hard to overstate how these conflicts have been roiling the state of Michigan, whether it's Israel and the Middle East and Gaza with our large populations here, or what's going on in Ukraine. We have a large Ukrainian and Polish American community who are watching this very, very closely. So they've really come home in the past week. These issues have come home. For me, I think it's important to have a strong American leadership role in the world. I do. I work for Democrats, I work for Republicans, but the one thing that was consistent is the idea that there should be a strong American leadership role in the world. Obviously, what's going on in Israel right now is deeply, deeply painful. We need a ceasefire. We need a negotiated ceasefire where hostages come home, where we go into a different phase of this conflict. Iran has deeply complicated that by firing ballistic missiles, some of them hypersonics, at Israel. On the Ukrainian side, look, Putin invaded. It was the first state, the democratic state, to be invaded since World War II. I would believe we have a responsibility to defend the democracies and arm the Ukrainians so that they can push back on Putin.
So be very clear, you're comfortable with the spending.
I am comfortable with the spending and the strong leadership role in the country, in the world, yes.
Very good. Mr. Rogers, your
I think
rebuttal.
This is probably the biggest difference between my opponent and I. She was the architect of the nuclear Iran nuclear deal. Supported the fact that we released Iranian oil into the market that gave them billions and billions of dollars, just bad judgment after bad judgment after bad judgment. And it was all on the heels of Afghanistan, which was an absolute embarrassment for the United States, which my opponent supported. If you look at the bad decisions, now we're engulfed in the Middle East in a way that's going to be hard to extract ourselves and still show engagement in the world, but not entanglement in the world.
All right, Ms. Slotkin, your rebuttal.
Yeah, look, there's one of us on the stage who has sat in a war zone and taken Iranian rockets, Iranian mortars, who has gone on dangerous convoys, dodging Iranian IEDs. One of us on the stage has studied the role they played in facilitating money, material, weapons to their proxies, to these terrorist groups around the region. So I take a backseat to no one on how hawkish we're going to be on Iraq. But I also would say that if we want to talk about long embroilments in the Middle East, Mr. Rogers knows all about that. He authorized the war on Iraq, and I do not want to get into another 20-year war in the Middle East.
Which is what we're doing now.
Okay, we're going to switch topics here, and the next question is for you, Ms. Slotkin. It's about abortion. Abortion and reproductive rights remain a hot-button issue post-Roe. How do you plan to address this topic in a way that respects both individual rights and differing viewpoints?
Sure. So look, this is very clear for me. I did not support overturning Roe. If codifying Roe v. Wade came in front of the U.S. Senate, I would vote for it, and I voted for Proposition 3 here in Michigan since I voted here in 2022. For me, I am crystal clear. Mr. Rogers has voted for every bill, every ban, every restriction on abortion that came in front of him for 20 straight years. He had a 100% voting record with his party. He never broke once. And now he's going to come out because he's put his finger in the wind. He said that, I need to win an election. Better not piss anybody off. And so he's changed his position completely and now wants you to believe that he's going to be a protector of women in the U.S. Senate. I can't tell you how strongly I believe that you have people tell you who they are when they vote. They are making it very, very clear. He has shown us who he is. Do not trust him on this issue.
Mr. Rogers, you now have 60 seconds. How do you plan to address this topic in a way that respects both individual rights and differing viewpoints?
Yeah, I think this is the most heart-wrenching decision a woman would ever have to make. And I think it's best made with her family, with her partner, with her faith, with her doctor, in where she lives. And so Michigan came together in consensus. And I know my opponent wants to make this as divisive as humanly possible, and I get that. It's unfortunate. And misrepresented so many of my positions on this issue. But I will tell you this. The state of Michigan and the people of Michigan went to the polls and voted. They voted to make abortion legal, and they put it a part of their Constitution, our Constitution. And so I won't do anything when I go back to the United States Senate to undo the vote of the people and their position and their concession and their compassion when it comes to this issue.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rogers. Ms. Slotkin, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Sure. Mr. Rogers voted 56 times for every bill, ban, and restriction on abortion that came in front of him. That's not misrepresenting. Those are his votes, right? I am so sick of people who don't understand women's health, who don't understand reproductive rights, who don't understand that this is about the rights of our grandchildren having the same rights as their grandmother, saying one thing and doing another. Michiganders, do not believe him. He will not protect you.
Congressman, you have the final 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate that she's taken this tone on something that's so completely untrue. I have stated my position very clearly from the beginning. I will respect the vote of the people of Michigan that they put as a part of the Michigan Constitution. But if you care about all women, I think this is probably a great time to talk about Title IX, where my opponent said I'm not protecting girls in sports, and I'm not protecting girls by allowing men into locker rooms, both of which she voted for. If you want to protect women, there are other ways to do it. I think that is an outlier in this particular debate, and it certainly doesn't put you on team normal.
We got to leave it there. Elissa, you have the next question.
Carolyn, thank you. We'll go to Mr. Rogers first for this next question. Immigration has been another hot button issue in this election. It's complex. So I'm going to ask this next question with two parts in mind. What policies would you propose to, one, enhance border security, and two, improve the legal immigration system?
Yeah,
60
hard to
seconds.
do in a minute, but the first thing we must do is reinforce that Remain in Mexico. Absolutely has to happen. You need to take away the ability for people in other countries to fill out an app and then come across the country. What we're finding is that 10 million persons coming across the border is because of a wide open border, and unfortunately my opponent supported all of it. So we have criminals coming across, we have fentanyl coming across, we have human trafficking at unprecedented numbers coming across that southern border. And you can see the problems everywhere. Matter of fact, the sheriff of Oakland County was just talking about another series of raids by illegal immigrants last night in Oakland County. And so this is a problem we have to deal with. We do remain in Mexico. We stop it. You can't have a discussion about what legal immigration and reform looks like until we secure our border, protect our citizens, and make it easier for people who are here already trying to go through the system legally to get into the country.
All right, 60 seconds for Ms. Slotkin on that. One, how would you enhance border security? And two, how would you improve the legal immigration system?
Yeah, well, as a CIA officer and a Pentagon official, I spent my entire life protecting the homeland. So for me, this was an easy one. I've done more border legislation than any member of Congress, Democrat or Republican, in the state of Michigan, because no one's proud of what's going on at the southern border. What's going on at the southern border is a symptom of a broken immigration system. It's not working for anybody, not for people at the border, not for immigrants, not for our businesses who desperately need labor. It's not working for anybody. For me, it is every country in the world has the right to know who's coming in its borders. We've got to do more to secure it, and we had a deal on the table. This is the sad thing, is that we were doing actually what I think most Michiganders want. Democrats and Republicans in the Senate were sitting together, conservative members, liberal members, and they were hammering out a compromise on the border. The border agent organization supported this move, and Mr. Rogers and his allies came out against it. They would rather have immigration and border as a political issue than actually do the real work and get things done.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. Rogers, 30 seconds again to underscore the policies you would propose for this.
Yeah, and just quickly, that bill that my opponent talks about was voted down in a bipartisan way because it was a terrible bill. 2 million illegal immigrants guaranteed to come across the border every single year. That is nonsense. That is a non-starter. And if you look at all the things they say, oh, we want to work on it, we're going to do a bill, we're going to send a letter, none of that worked. If you've talked to the mothers or the families of people who have had children raped in this country by illegal immigrants, you would know how serious this issue is and how obfuscating your position isn't going to get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. 30 seconds rebuttal for you,
Yeah,
Ms. Slotkin.
look, if it was such a bad deal, how come the folks who work here in Detroit, in Port Huron, and in Sault Ste. Marie, who actually work on the border, endorsed it? Do you know better than they do about how to secure a border? That, to me, is what Democrats and Republicans are supposed to be doing. Hammering it out, kicking out the press, kicking out Twitter, and just actually hammering out a compromise. That's what Americans expect of their leaders, and we were doing it. And then Mr. Rogers and his allies said, you know what, this is too good of an issue to use. If I worked at the Pentagon, if I was back at the Pentagon where I used to work, and I looked at a problem and I said it was really dangerous, but I don't want to do anything about it for political reasons, I'd be fired.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Chuck?
Candidates, this next question touches home for many Americans and many people right here in the state of Michigan. The U.S. Surgeon General has declared gun violence a public health issue. Considering current gun death rates, mass shootings, and 2 recent presidential candidate assassination attempts, thankfully they were not successful, do you believe America needs stricter gun laws? Yes or no, and why? Ms. Slotkin?
Yes.
60
For
seconds.
me, look, I grew up in Michigan. I grew up with guns, right? I have only positive memories of my dad teaching me how to shoot skeet and target practice with my brothers. It's part of our culture here for many, many Michiganders. And when I was in Iraq, I carried a Glock and an M4 on 3 tours in Iraq. And thank God I had it in a war zone. But this idea that we can't go after the #1 killer of children in America is broken. And while Mr. Rogers was off in Florida, I was representing this district where we had not 1, but 2 school shootings in my district, Oxford High School and Michigan State University. There has been nothing worse in my experience than explaining PTSD to a 14-year-old who all he did was sit in his social studies class while a colleague, one of his fellow students, shot up innocent children. To me, we have to, as Democrats and Republicans, gun owners and non-gun owners, go after the #1 killer of our children in our communities, in our schools, by suicide, by accident. It is the responsibility of leaders to protect children.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. Rogers, same question. Do we need stricter gun control laws to be able to curb the violence in our society?
We need to enforce the gun laws that we have. We also need to deal with mental health issues that are happening in our schools. This generation of Americans is under mental duress and distress like I have never seen before. And it means that we're going to have to come together on how we get ahead of these problems. Banning guns isn't going to do it. Matter of fact, the two shootings that happened here in Michigan were by handguns. Everybody talks about the other kinds of guns. We need to get at the root of the problem, which is mental health. And so if we don't tackle this mental health issue, we're going to be in trouble. And I just tell you the difference between where my opponent is on this. The state of Michigan just cut 93% of all school resource funds and mental health funds, including Oxford, by the way, where the shooting happened. This is unacceptable. And there are other ways to do it. I did it in my personal life when I was in the private sector by trying to get dogs into schools so that they could be a deterrent to shootings happening in schools. There are so many other things that we can do. This notion of thumping your chest isn't going to get it done.
Mr. Rogers,
and we better get serious about helping this mental health issue happening in these younger generations.
All right, thank you very much. Let's be mindful of the clock. I know you're passionate, both of you, on this. Your rebuttal, Ms.
Sure.
Slotkin.
All you need to know is gun violence is the #1 killer of children under 21 in our country. Are you going to do something about it, or are you not? My opponent doesn't want to do anything about it, right? And why? Because he has a 100% rating with the gun lobby, and they give him campaign donations. It's really, really easy to understand why politicians, in the face of murdered children, don't do anything. They don't do it because they receive campaign donations, and they're scared. They're scared because they don't want to lose their election, and it's terrible.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. Rogers, your rebuttal.
With all that passion, you would have thought my opponent would have introduced a whole series of bills in the U.S. Congress. She did not. Listen, I've been in law enforcement for a big chunk of my life. I was an FBI agent. I worked the streets. Everything from gun violations and human trafficking and drug cases and organized crime cases. Listen, I understand what victims are and how we get at this problem. The way we do it is actually constructive dialogue with these schools, with mental health, and with smart precautions that save kids' lives, not the huffing and puffing that you hear here in name calling.
All right, candidates, thank you so much. Carolyn, your question.
All right, let's talk about some education. And Mr. Rogers, this question is for you first. Michigan's education system ranks 41st in the latest U.S. News Best States rankings, and we underperformed in key areas like reading. How would you improve Michigan's K-12 education system to ensure all students, regardless of their zip code, have access to high-quality learning that prepares them for the future? Mr. Rogers, you have 60 seconds for this question.
Yeah. You could take an hour on this particular issue. My wife and I have been very, very engaged in literacy efforts, both here in the state of Michigan and elsewhere around the country. This, to me, may be the biggest civil rights issue of our generation. Our kids are not learning how to read. Here in Michigan, 39% of third graders could read at grade level. 39%. If you don't read in the fourth grade, by the fourth grade, you have a 70% chance of going to prison or being on welfare. This is so unacceptable. And here's the good news. There are such great ways we can get around it. We support reading reclamation programs where they go into the school, they take these kids out an hour a day, intensive tutoring, and they do it with, this is the secret sauce now, phonics, and get kids reading back at grade level. The amazing progress we could make if we invest in these reading reclamation programs to get kids reading again would change America. Forbes said $1.7 trillion to our economy if we get kids reading at the 12th grade by the 12th grade.
Thank you much. Ms. Slotkin, how would you improve Michigan's K-12 education system to ensure all students, regardless of their zip code, have access to high-quality learning that prepares them for the future?
Yeah, well, obviously, it's the responsibility of any leader to make sure that the next generation gets educated. Everyone has equal access to education, no matter where you live, no matter what community you're from, and that it prepares you for the jobs of the future, right? That's the responsibility of any society. To me, the federal government is responsible for a lot of funding to make sure that we get our schools fully funded. We've had a problem with that here in Michigan. We have a problem with how much we pay our teachers, right? And they're making choices to leave teaching. There are places in Macomb County where they've struggled to staff schools 5 days a week, even after COVID, because they just don't have enough staff. So we have a whole sort of generational problem with our education system. But for me, I'm a believer in public education. Mr. Rogers and I may differ on this, right? One of his biggest supporters is Betsy DeVos. She is very, very clear about her theory of education and that she literally wants to defund public schools. She was our Secretary of Education, but now wants to get rid of the Secretary of Education position. For me, I believe in strong public schools.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. 30 seconds for rebuttal, Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 5 boys. My dad was a shop teacher at a public school. All 5 of us went to public schools. My opponent went to a very elite private school. It's an experience you have to have, I think, to understand the challenges of public schools here in the state of Michigan. And this is the other thing. My opponent likes to talk about everything other than what we're talking about. Betsy DeVos, I'm not sure how that has anything to do with us trying to prove education for our kids. But I will tell you this, there's a reason. In the last 5 years, she voted 100% with the Biden.
Mr. Rogers, your time is up.
She voted 100% with Biden-Harris, by the way, just to get that out.
Ms. Slotkin, you have the final 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear how Betsy DeVos is connected to education. She was the Secretary of Education, the longest-serving cabinet secretary under Donald Trump, and her and every member of her family have donated to you for years and years and years. So it makes sense that you adopt her approach to education, defunding public schools, demonizing public schools and public school teachers. I don't believe in that. Every kid in every corner of our state should have fair access to education.
Thank you both. The next question is coming from Elissa.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. Let's turn our attention to health care and affordability. And Ms. Slotkin, I will address you for this first question. Research from the CDC shows the high cost of prescription drugs has prompted more than 9 million American adults to either skip taking their medication, put off refills, or take smaller doses. It's heartbreaking. And then there are those who are worried about the bigger picture, and rightly so. Lena A. from Flushing posted this question. As healthcare costs continue to rise, many Americans struggle to meet basic medical needs. What ideas would you propose or support in order to attain an affordable healthcare system while maintaining high-quality medical care?
Yeah.
And you have 60 seconds.
Well, this one is particularly personal to me. I lost my mother in 2011 from ovarian cancer. And when she died, she did not have medical insurance. So the same week we're finding out about her diagnosis is the same week and the same month that we're filling out the paperwork for her to declare bankruptcy. I believe that in the United States of America, all people deserve access to health care they can afford, and prescription drugs are way, way out of people's price ranges. So I don't have to imagine what I would do on this issue. I have done it. We have voted, finally, to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Everyone understands Costco. You go to Costco, you buy in bulk, you get a lower per unit price. Medicare was prohibited from negotiating drug costs, just like Costco. Why? Because people like Mike Rogers voted for it 5 times. He voted for it 5 times. How is it possible to vote against Medicare negotiation to bring down the price? For me, we start there, and we continue to add more and more drugs that we can negotiate and get cheaper prices.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. Rogers, what ideas would you propose or support to attain an affordable health care system while also maintaining high-quality medical care? You have 60 seconds.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is also personal for me. I was a cancer survivor at the age of 19. We were able to beat it. I went on to the United States Army and served as an officer and a special agent with the FBI and went on to Congress. Amazing. My father also was a cancer survivor, had kidney cancer, pretty rough go of it for a long time there, but he beat it. I think he was, as my family would say, tougher than woodpecker lips in order to beat that thing. But I will tell you this, when we hear this kind of rhetoric about, oh, if you don't do this, it's this, the bill that they supported still has our prices. I'll give you Ozempic as an example, is $800. In France, it's $80. It means the United States is continuing to support the rest of the world when it comes to research, development, and cost of prescription drugs. I would go back. We're going to make sure we do average sales price, including international, to bring their prices up and our prices down. We should not be paying for foreign governments medical and medicine when it comes to prescription drugs.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Ms. Slotkin, 30 seconds
This
rebuttal.
is rich. This is rich. This man voted 5 times against Medicare negotiating drug prices. So now he's claiming, oh, he's upset that France pays less than us. He did that. You're upset that Canada pays less than us? He did that. He voted 5 times. That's not, as a matter of public record. Google it, right? It's very, very open. It's public information. So the idea that someone who voted against Medicare negotiating somehow now is the champion of it, I got a bridge I want to sell you if you think this guy's going to protect you.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. Rogers, 30 seconds rebuttal.
The price, look at the prices that have gone up in the last 6 years when my opponent was in office. Not only prescription drug prices and premiums, but premiums in health care. So some notion that today she has the gall to stand here before you and say, oh, everything's wonderful on your prices. It is not. And it's not because of the way they approached this. And they did advantage foreign governments over U.S. Providers in Medicare. I put Medicare prescription drug when I was in Congress way back when as a part of Medicare. First time it's ever happened.
And
that
Chuck,
was me.
You have the next question.
All right. Thank you so much. Candidates, there are thousands of Michiganders who are senior citizens watching the two of you debate. In the questions that we got from them, this ranked pretty high on the list. According to the Social Security Board of Trustees, the Social Security Administration will be unable to pay scheduled benefits in full or on time starting in 2035, just a little over a decade from now, if there are no changes in the current system. If elected, what specific legislation will you offer to strengthen a system that serves as a financial safety net for millions of Americans? Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, to me, it's so important that we strengthen and protect Social Security going forward. Again, my father and my mother, who are wonderful, wonderful people, they didn't come from wealth, but they worked their entire lives. They counted on it. It was important to them to make sure that they didn't fall into poverty when they retired. It's the same with my in-laws, the same issue. They survive on Social Security and Medicare. There's so much gamesmanship on this, and there's so much false advertising, candidly, on this. If we are ever going to solve Social Security, we're going to have a bipartisan commission that actually sits down and goes through the numbers and puts their party politics on the outside and worries about the seniors on the inside. My opponent's had 5 years to do something, has done nothing. And so if you think about what's at risk, it's significant. And you're going to hear a lot of nonsense, but I will tell you, this is an important issue for the seniors and the families, and you should not let them scare you into getting your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Ms. Slotkin,
yeah,
your 60 seconds.
The senior citizens of this state can know exactly what they're going to get with Mike Rogers, right? He voted to privatize or cut back Social Security and Medicare over a dozen times. Look at it. It's just an open record. You can't deny that you voted for those things. You voted to increase the age of retirement from 65 to 67. You did that. That's not made up. You voted against seniors allowing to negotiate drug prices through Medicare. You did that. So we don't have to guess what Mike Rogers will do in the seat. He has shown us who he is over and over and over again. And why? Why does someone say to themselves, I'm going to vote against allowing Medicare to negotiate? I'm going to vote to privatize Social Security and Medicare. Why do you do that? Because you have donors who are demanding that of you, because you're getting campaign donations. It's just pure and unadulterated greed. He takes over $1 million from the pharmaceutical industry. Why are we surprised when he votes against Medicare being able to negotiate drug prices?
Mr. Rogers, thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. Rogers, your opportunity, 30 seconds to answer some of the things I heard you under your breath saying. Not true.
Fair. This is just dishonest in this debate, and you should be ashamed of yourself. This is maybe the most important issue for people. And I get it. You want to scare people. But think about what's happened in the last 5 years. You want to talk about 30 years ago, a quote. I'm telling you what's happening right now. People are afraid for their future in this state. They can't afford groceries. Their heating bill is up, and they can't afford it. And you know who gave them all of that? My opponent in the last 5 years. You don't hear her talking about those successes. It's because it's been so harmful for our state and our seniors. I will tell you, I'm going back to Washington and change it and fix it.
All right. Ms. Slotkin, your rebuttal.
He voted over a dozen times to privatize or to cut Medicare or Social Security. He voted to raise the retirement age. He said, his quote, "We need to rethink retirement." This is not trying to scare anyone other than to outline his record. I'm not throwing insults. He could just own your record, Mike, man. You voted these things in your own time, within your own free will. You had a choice. You sat in that job. You made your choice.
All right, I have the next question, and it's to you, Ms. Slotkin. It's about climate change. Climate change and energy independence are critical issues, especially with Michigan experiencing more severe flooding hurting so many communities. How do you plan to balance environmental protection, energy needs, and economic growth while addressing these increasing climate-related disasters? Ms. Slotkin, you have 60 seconds.
Yeah, you know, we have been seeing, we haven't been hit as bad as other places, but man, we have been seeing the changes happen in our state. Our farmers talk about it, about the warmer winters. We've had more flooding for our lake communities. In the years while Mr. Rogers was away, we were dealing with this, and it was amazing. I had Republicans and Democrats coming together and talking about how we need to plan infrastructure for more storms, more severe storms. So I believe in climate change, that it's real, and we need to do something about it. For me, we also know we're going to need more energy. Everyone's got energy in their pockets right now, right? With their phones, we have increased energy needs. So I do, and I believe what I was trained to do at the Pentagon, which is an all-of-the-above approach. I want us to invest in energy traditional sources, natural gas, wind, solar, nuclear. All of those things help us maintain our independence, but increase the amount of energy that we know we're going to need. We do that, and at the same time, make our climate cleaner.
Thank you so much, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. Rogers, how do you plan to balance environmental protection, energy needs, and economic growth while addressing these increasing climate-related disasters?
Yeah. Again, this is a huge, important issue. I'm glad my opponent has had an election year conversion to being for all of the above. The votes to stymie our ability to be energy independent have been pretty brutal for people here in Michigan. And so when you look at the costs that have been increased, huge, and it cost them more in gas at the pump, it's cost them more in gas for their electric bill, and it's really had a devastating impact. I believe we can get there if we're smart. We don't do these EV mandates because it sounds good. We're jeopardizing 400,000 working people in this state, 400,000 people by these EV mandates. We shouldn't do that. We can't get there. So here's what we've got to do. You've got to do modular nuclear reactors to try to get our electric grid up to snuff. Let the market decide and take us. Hybrids we should build here in the state of Michigan. We should be proud of them. It keeps auto workers. You don't have to plug it in, and it gets you down the road. If we do all of these things, we can get to a better climate.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Ms. Slotkin, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, when we're talking about the issue of climate change, I think every Michigander on a bipartisan basis cares about our lakes, our rivers. That's our heritage, right? We grow up here. It's in our blood. And to me, there's nothing more important than protecting those Great Lakes. It's a responsibility of anyone elected. We have very different records on this, right? We have very different feelings about protecting the Great Lakes. For me, I think it's the #1 issue, and it's something we've passed many pieces of legislation to do all kinds of things with the Great Lakes, but it starts by understanding we do have a changing climate, and we have a responsibility to do something about it.
Mr. Rogers, you have the last 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, again, you can do both, but you cannot do it at the expense of people who are worried about their next meal. And the policies that have been coming out of Washington, D.C., where my opponent has voted 100% with Biden and Harris, have been devastating to our state and our costs. You can protect the Great Lakes. You can have a better electric grid. You can produce hybrid cars that keep people employed right here in the Michigan, but you can't do it by big, heavy government mandates that are costing you money and costing your job.
Thank you both. That'll do it for climate. Elissa, you have the next question.
Thank you, Carolyn. Mr. Rogers, we'll start with you for this next question. According to the Education Data Initiative, 14% of Michigan residents have student loan debt, with the average amount being $35,790. Nationwide, only 18 other states and the District of Columbia have higher college debt than the state of Michigan. Are you for or against forgiving student loan debt, and how do you propose to address the rising cost of higher education? Mr. Rogers, you have 60 seconds.
Yeah, this is a huge problem for, I think, all generations, but this generation particularly. Here's what I believe. I don't believe that your neighbor should write you a check for your school debt, but I do believe that you could provide a service to the country of which we need to work it off. We have desperate need for school counselors. Let's make sure that if you have that debt and you spend some time in a public school doing school counseling, you get your relief on your student debt. We have not recruited a military class for the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines in all 4 years, in the last 4 years. That's a problem. You know what? There's ways you can pay back your student debt. Go in the military. It's a magnificent thing. I served as an officer in the Army. There's 4 generations of Rogers that served. My son in the Navy, my wife's family, 4 generations that served. It's a great way to give back. Let's not just do it by giving you a check. Let's find a way that you can give back to your country, and then we can help you in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Ms. Slotkin, are you for or against forgiving student loan debt, and how do you propose to address the rising cost of higher education?
Yeah, look, for this generation, the generation before, people are just living under a mountain of student debt. And even at our great institutions, state institutions, 50 years ago, the state was paying 75% of tuition, student was paying 25%. Now that's completely flipped. Student is paying 75%, state is paying 25%. I believe we should cap student loans at 2.5%. We have students who are taking out loans for 10, 11, 12% interest, and they're living under that debt for the rest of their lives. I think that going to school is different than building a deck on your house. It's an investment in society, so capping student loans. And then I think actually there's an area we may agree. I believe that we should have a program here in Michigan where if you agree to serve in one of the really important, much needed job professions, teaching, nursing, mental health professionals, fire, first responders, police, that you should get tuition reduction or tuition free, as long as you sign a commitment to stay in the state of Michigan and work in those career fields. So it may be something we agree on.
30 seconds rebuttal for you. Mr. Rogers, again, you are against forgiving student loan debt.
How we forgive it, I think, is important. And I agree with my opponent. I do believe that service is important. And we've gotten away from that. And I think if you provide a service for a need that we all need here in Michigan or around the country, I think this is absolutely the right way to get students to understand that you signed a contract, you have some obligation. Some obligation could be a great service to your country, number one. The other thing we have to do is stop raising prices for these kids so that they can afford their student loan payments.
I wish we had all night long to answer these questions. Thank you for going with our time constraints tonight. And Ms. Slotkin, 30 seconds for you again. You are for forgiving student loan debt.
So no, I'm for 2%, 2.5% on all student loans. For me, I don't think that doing debt relief all in one fell swoop for one group of young people solves the underlying problem. That doesn't help a Michigan State student who's a freshman right now. But we got to do something about the debt. There's just a bunch of different ways to do it. And for me, capping student loans at 2.5% is the way that I would propose. But we need to do something on this issue because this generation is not facing the same sort of even playing field that the last generations have had.
Ms. Slotkin, thank you very much for your answer. Carolyn?
All right, this hour has flown by, so we are now to our final question of the night, and it goes to you, Ms. Slotkin. With rising partisan divides, the spread of misinformation, and growing incivility in political discourse, what specific steps will you take to encourage bipartisan cooperation, safeguard democracy, and promote respectful dialogue, both in Congress and among your constituents? You have 60 seconds.
Yeah, I think because I come from the national security world, where really, you don't ask people how they vote. You work alongside them for 15 years and you have no idea because it doesn't matter. For me, civility and decency and respect between parties is a positive thing. We want two healthy parties that debate the role of government in our lives. It's how it should be. But obviously, we know we're going through a period of instability. For me, you have to start with our democracy, right? It is critical that everybody, every decent person supports the democracy that our founders believed in and set up, that is our birthright. I personally have a real problem with the misinformation and disinformation that is spread about our elections. For me, as someone who barricaded herself inside her office on January 6th, I know what it means when senior officials talk openly about misinformation and disinformation about our democracy. I think everyone has the responsibility to support free and fair elections, and I will respect whoever wins these next rounds of elections.
Mr. Rogers, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think I got it. And here's the good news. I served as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and proved that you can be bipartisan and get big things done. It's not easy to do, honestly. It took us a long time, but my vice chairman, I was the chairman as a Republican, my vice chairman was a Democrat. We ended up coming together, working hard, spending time line by line in a budget that's $78 billion and cut $7.5 billion at the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan war because we decided that it was more important that we work together than we be partisan when it comes to national security. That takes leadership. It takes effort. It takes a lot of work. And it's not just throwing a vote here and there. It's about digging in and getting it done. I think we can do this. I'm a passionate believer in it. Matter of fact, my wife tells me my eternal optimism may be a genetic defect. But I will tell you we can get back to this. But what we have to do is go back and fix the problems that are happening to families here in Michigan. It's so, so important.
Thank you much, Ms. Slotkin. You have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
The only way we can fix our system and the polarization that's going on right now is if we start by reinforcing our democracy. What is really concerning to me is that the 2014 Mike Rogers was happy to be bipartisan. The 2024 Mike Rogers, just a couple of weeks ago, said he's worried about, quote, shenanigans in our voting systems in Southeast Michigan, which we know what that means. He sits next to Mr. Trump as he spreads misinformation and disinformation. Our democracy has to be sacred, and I want the 2014 Mike Rogers back.
Thank you both for that. Chuck?
Rogers, gets everybody.
Did you? Sorry, I'm sorry. Did I miss your rebuttal?
I'm
moving
I get
too quick.
45 seconds.
There you go.
What you're saying?
No,
just
but you
I'm kidding.
Go ahead.
I'm kidding. First of all, the reason that 2014 Mike Rogers is absolutely here. Here's what's different. Your gas prices are up. Your grocery prices are up. Your energy prices are up. Housing prices are up. And people are afraid not only for their kids to buy a house, but if they can stay in their house. This is the most consequential election I have ever seen. And the policies, 100% my opponent voted for all of the policies that gave us these bad, bad outcomes, including EV mandates. All of that has to be fixed. We get that fixed, trust me, we're going to get along just fine.
All right. Congresswoman, Congressman, thank you so much for your answers to our questions. It's now time for your closing statements. Going back to what I said at the very top of the show, Ms. Slotkin, you go first, and followed by Mr. Rogers.
Great. Thank you to our moderators for a great debate. Appreciate the time. Again, I will end where I started. I think at the end of the day, your vote is about who you trust more to come, to listen, to learn from you, and then to go suit up and fight for you in Washington. We've outlined really big differences between us, right? On the middle class and bringing supply chains home, competing with China. There are really big differences, both on substance but also on style. To me, there's no greater responsibility as an elected official to represent all Michiganders. So I want to make a particular kind of outreach to the Republicans watching this debate. Just like my dad, a Republican lifelong who just felt like the party had left him right? For all of you who are wondering where you have a home, you always have an open door in my office, and I will always listen based on the merits and the substance of your argument. There is no monopoly on good ideas, and I think the only way we move forward is if decent Republicans and decent Democrats debate, push, and pull in a civil way, in a decent way. At the end of the day, I think there's real differences, as I said, on substance, on style, but also on motivation. For me, as someone who has served my entire life, who proudly worked for Democrats and Republicans, Bush, Obama, to me, this is about our country and doing what's right for the place that we love. Mr. Rogers, I fear, has very different motivations. So at the end of the day, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, to earn your vote, and thanks for the debate.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. Mr. Rogers, you get the final word.
Yeah, thank you. I've traveled all across this great state, met literally thousands and thousands of people. Michigan families are hurting. So any of the fancy talk or let's look what happened 30 years ago needs to be set aside. What happened in the last 4 years? I talked about this in the beginning. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And my opponent voted 100% with Biden-Harris on all of the things that have raised your prices. So I ask you this. If you are worried about your grocery prices, if you are worried about your job being here from heavy EV mandates that my opponent supported, if you are worried about what the next generation of jobs and housing costs are for your family, then I ask for your vote. I have done it before. And I will tell you this, I will go back to Washington, D.C. I will work as hard as I can as a guy that worked on an assembly line, a guy that's the youngest of 5 boys, a guy that served in the United States Army as an officer, a guy that worked the streets and street crime, watching human trafficking at its ugliest, watching drug trafficking at its ugliest. And know this, I will fix the border and close and secure it for our families. I will do something about the education system in America. I will bring your prices down. I will go back to Washington and make that change. I will have your back when it comes to November 5th.
Thank you so much, Congressman Rogers. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Slotkin, for a very spirited debate and a civil debate. And to our viewers at home, thank you so much for tuning in. We will have a complete wrap-up on 7 News Detroit at 10 and 11. And if you want to watch the debate in its entirety, go to our website, WXYZ.com.
We've got you in the morning as well. We will have continuing coverage and live expert analysis of this debate all morning long, starting at 4:35 and 6 o'clock on 7 News Detroit this morning.
And don't forget to vote on Tuesday, November 5th. You can vote 3 different ways: absentee ballot, early voting, or the old-fashioned way, just show up and cast your ballot. From all of us here at WXYZ, thank you. Good day.